Most independent artists think money comes from streams, or going viral, or getting signed, or finally blowing up. That belief shapes almost every decision they make. They focus on scale. They chase visibility. They measure success by how big something looks. But here's the uncomfortable truth. For independent artists, money rarely comes from where they expect it to. It doesn't come from random attention. It doesn't come from algorithms deciding to push your content. And it definitely doesn't come from passive listening alone. Streaming platforms pay fractions. Social platforms pay nothing. Virality creates spikes, not stability. So where does the money actually come from? It comes from support. Intentional support. From people choosing to spend money, not just attention. And that choice doesn't happen automatically. It happens when there's clarity. When someone understands what you offer. When they feel connected to what you're building. When there's a clear way to participate beyond listening. Independent income doesn't begin at scale. It begins at structure. It begins when you stop building only for visibility and start building for ownership. Because ownership is what turns attention into opportunity. If you don't own the relationship, you don't control the revenue. This episode isn't about hype. It's about mechanics. Where the money actually forms. Why small audiences can outperform large ones. And why structure matters more than popularity. Once you understand that, your strategy changes completely. Most independent artists don't struggle because there's no money in music. They struggle because they don't understand the difference between direct income and indirect income. Indirect income is what most people think of first. Streaming payouts, ad revenue, platform bonuses, algorithm-driven spikes. The problem with indirect income is control. You don't control the payout rate. You don't control distribution. You don't control the algorithm. You're participating in someone else's system. And those systems were not built to prioritize independent artists. Direct income works differently. Direct income happens when someone chooses to support you intentionally. Buying merch, purchasing tickets, joining something you own, supporting a product you control. That difference changes everything. Indirect income depends on scale. Direct income depends on connection. You can have thousands of listeners and very little direct income. But you can also have a smaller audience with strong direct support. Scale feels impressive. Connection pays. This is where most independent artists misunderstand the game. They focus almost entirely on indirect systems because they're visible. Streaming numbers are public. Views are public. Followers are public. Direct support is quieter, but it's stronger. The moment you understand that money forms through ownership and intention, not just exposure, your strategy shifts. You stop building only for platforms. You start building for people. And people are what create sustainable income. The goal isn't to ignore indirect income. It's to stop depending on it. Because dependence on systems you don't control keeps you unstable. Ownership builds leverage. And leverage is where the money actually starts forming. One of the biggest misconceptions in independent music is that bigger automatically means richer. More followers should mean more money. More streams should mean more income. More views should mean more stability. But that assumption ignores one critical factor. Engagement and connection matter more than scale. A large audience that passively consumes your work doesn't necessarily support it. A smaller audience that feels connected often will. If 10,000 people stream your song but none of them feel invested in you, the income is minimal. If 100 people genuinely value what you're building and choose to support it directly, the outcome can be very different. Scale amplifies. Connection converts. This is where independent artists get distracted. They chase size instead of strength. They believe growth is the solution to every problem, when in reality, growth without loyalty creates fragile systems. A small, connected audience is powerful because it's intentional. They don't just listen, they pay attention. They don't just watch, they participate. They don't just react, they invest. That level of engagement isn't built through virality. It's built through clarity, repetition, and trust. When artists focus only on getting bigger, they often sacrifice depth. They speak broadly instead of clearly. They trend hop instead of building identity. They aim for reach instead of resonance. And resonance is what drives support. Money doesn't come from how many people know your name. It comes from how many people believe in what you're building. A smaller audience that understands your direction will support more consistently than a large audience that barely remembers you. That's not theory, it's structure. And once you understand that, the pressure to blow up starts to fade. Because you realize income doesn't begin at massive scale. It begins at meaningful connection. If attention is temporary and connection is powerful, then control is the real currency. Control over your audience. Control over your offers. Control over how income flows. Most independent artists don't struggle because there's no money available. They struggle because they don't control the systems that generate it. When all your income depends on platforms, you're renting your opportunity. Streaming payouts can change. Algorithms can shift. Accounts can be limited. Visibility can disappear overnight. And when that happens, you have no leverage. Control changes that dynamic. When you own the relationship, even in small ways, your income becomes less fragile. If someone discovers you, do you have a way to stay connected outside the platform? If someone wants to support you, is there something you directly offer? If a platform disappears tomorrow, do you still have access to your audience? These questions determine stability. Control doesn't require millions of followers. It requires intentional design. Designing paths for support. Designing ways to communicate directly. Designing systems that don't collapse when visibility drops. Independent income forms when control increases. The more you depend entirely on third-party systems, the more unstable your earnings will be. The more you build things you own, even small things, the more predictable income becomes. This is why some artists with modest audiences can generate steady income while others with large numbers struggle. It's not popularity, it's leverage. And leverage is built through ownership. When you understand that control is the real currency, your priorities shift. You stop chasing attention blindly. You start building systems intentionally, and systems are what turn creative effort into financial stability. There was a time when I measured progress by how loud things felt. More reactions meant momentum. More views meant growth. More attention meant I was getting closer. But the louder things got, the more I realized something wasn't changing. The applause didn't translate into stability. The visibility didn't reduce uncertainty. The engagement didn't automatically create income. That's when I had to shift my perspective. I started paying attention to a different signal. Not how many people reacted, but how many people supported. Who showed up consistently? Who invested, even in small ways? Who paid attention beyond a single post? That distinction changed everything. Applause feels good. It's public. It's visible. It's easy to screenshot. Support is quieter. It doesn't always come with comments or big reactions. Sometimes it shows up in a purchase. Sometimes it shows up in a direct message. Sometimes it shows up in someone returning again and again. When I started valuing support over applause, my decisions changed. I stopped chasing moments that looked impressive but didn't build anything. I started focusing on strengthening the relationship with the people who were already paying attention. That shift made growth feel slower, but more stable. And stability is what independence actually requires. Applause can boost your ego. Support builds your foundation. Once I understood that difference, I stopped treating big numbers as proof of progress. I started treating consistent support, even small amounts, as the real signal, because that's where money actually forms. Not in the noise, but in the connection. If Independent Artist Game is helping you understand where the money actually forms as an independent artist, the simplest way to support what we're building is to like this video, share it with another artist, and subscribe. These conversations are about ownership, leverage, and building something sustainable, not hype. And if you want to support directly, you can grab merch at southentmusic.com. Everything there helps keep this series independent, consistent, and focused on clarity over noise. Now let's close this out. Money for independent artists doesn't begin at scale. It begins at structure. Most people are taught to believe that income shows up after you become popular. after you blow up, after you reach some invisible threshold of attention. But that thinking keeps artists stuck. Because scale without structure doesn't create stability. It creates spikes. Spikes feel exciting. They feel like progress, but they don't guarantee sustainability. What actually creates income is control. Control over the relationship. Control over the offer. Control over the direction. When you build systems that allow people to support you directly, even in small ways, income becomes possible. Not because you're famous, but because you're intentional. A small audience that trusts you is more powerful than a large audience that barely remembers you. Support forms when connection is clear. Connection forms when direction is clear. And direction only becomes clear when you stop building only for platforms and start building for people. That's where the money actually comes from. Not from random streams, not from algorithm boosts, not from hoping something goes viral. It comes from ownership. Ownership of your message. Ownership of your platform. Ownership of the relationship. Once you understand that, your strategy shifts. You stop obsessing over visibility. You stop waiting for permission. You start building systems intentionally. And when systems are in place, income stops feeling mysterious. It becomes mechanical. Not automatic, but understandable. That understanding removes confusion. And when confusion is removed, independence becomes possible. That's the difference. That's the leverage. That's the game.